Hello and welcome to Voices from the Left. I'm your host, Craig. Thanks for listening. This episode is a recording of me on the 805 Uncensored podcast presenting a book report on the Pinkertons. Enjoy.
Hello, everyone. You are listening to the 805 Uncensored, a show on the Anti-Capitalist Podcast Network hosted by three leftists, recorded on occupied Chumash and Timucuan land. This podcast covers a variety of topics from music to politics, news, spirituality, philosophy, and more. There are no limits, which is why we are uncensored, so welcome. Please follow us on your podcast and social media platforms of choice. This episode, we're excited to welcome back Craig from Voices from the Left podcast. He's going to dive into an episode all about the Pinkerton Agency. So thanks again for coming back on, man.
Yeah, this is going to be great. Thanks, Jordan. Thanks, Heather.
Yeah, anytime. So I'll just let you take the floor, man.
All right. Sounds good. So unless otherwise noted, the information for this comes from a book by the Charles River editors called The Pinkerton Agency, The History of Allan Pinkerton and America's First Major Private Detective Organization. And I've broken this up into three parts: pre-Civil War, Civil War, and post-Civil War. It just kind of, I think, flowed a little better. So without further ado, we'll get rolling on the pre-Civil War. So Allan Pinkerton was born in Glasgow, Scotland on August 25th, 1819. His father, William, a police sergeant, died in the line of duty when Allan was 10. To support his family, Allan worked as a cooper, better known as a barrel maker, and he became involved with a group called the Chartists. The Chartists were a national movement that advocated for the, quote, People's Charter, unquote, which listed reforms designed to give working men representation in Parliament and the right to vote. His activities with the group gained him sufficient notoriety to have the British authorities issue a warrant for his arrest. In 1842, he and his wife, Joan, fled to the U.S. to avoid arrest. They settled roughly 50 miles northwest of Chicago in Dundee, Illinois, on the Fox River, where Allan built a cabin, and they began a cooperage. So he brought that barrel making knowledge with him, of course, because he wouldn't just forget it. But then he decided he'd make his own business out of it when he got to the States. And according to a book written by Pinkerton called Criminal Reminiscences and Detective Sketches, in 1847, he was in the woods near his home, searching for trees appropriate for making barrel staves, when he stumbled across a deserted campfire on an island. And he suspected that it was being used by counterfeiters or horse thieves. He gave this information to the local sheriff, who, with the help of Pinkerton, traced a group of outlaws to this island and captured the entire gang, including some counterfeit coins. Two shopkeepers from Dundee heard of his help with the sheriff and hired him to locate a counterfeiter they believed to be passing fake $10 bills in the area. Pinkerton learned the man's name and found him posing to be a criminal wanting to purchase fake bills. He met with him and purchased 50 counterfeit $10 bills. Pinkerton then went to the police in Chicago and informed them of the counterfeiter's operation. With the help of the police, Pinkerton arranged another meeting with the guy at a hotel in Chicago. Upon meeting with Pinkerton, he didn't bring any bills with him, but was arrested anyway. This fellow, his name's John Craig. He turned out to be friends with the sheriff of Kane County, who took custody and helped him escape. Allan's detective skills managed to get him elected to sheriff in 1849, and he was appointed the first police detective in Chicago. And he was also employed by the post office to investigate mail theft. Any questions, comments before I continue?
Just what I said there. Heather's originally from the Chicago suburbs.
Mm,
Thought that was kind of interesting.
yeah.
Yeah.
In 1850, Pinkerton partnered with Chicago attorney Edward Rucker and formed the Northwestern Police Agency, soon renamed to the Pinkerton National Detective Agency. The first cases involved railroad thefts, and by 1855, Pinkerton had a contract with Illinois Central Railroad to provide operational support. The chief engineer and vice president of Illinois Central Railroad at the time was George McClellan, and its attorney was Abraham Lincoln. Pinkerton and McClellan became close friends as McClellan's trust in his detective skills grew. Pinkerton was also an abolitionist, working with leaders of the abolition movement near Chicago in the 1850s. He and Frederick Douglass reportedly attended meetings with a group connected to famous abolitionist John Brown. During those meetings, they arranged for the purchase of clothes and supplies for John Brown and Company. There are rumors that said Pinkerton's cabin was a stop on the Underground Railroad and helping freed slaves escape the South. The book didn't really say whether or not it was substantiated. They called it rumors, so who knows? In 1858, Pinkerton allegedly arranged for John Brown's party of freedom seekers to take a train around Lake Michigan to Detroit, where they crossed the border into Canada. Pinkerton's work is said to have helped John Brown and his group attempt their raid on the U.S. Arsenal at Harper's Ferry in 1859, which of course failed, with Brown being caught, tried, and hanged. Rumors abounded of plots by pro-slavery forces to assassinate Lincoln during his train ride from Illinois to D.C. for his inauguration. Lincoln's campaign hired the Pinkerton Agency to investigate the threats. Pinkerton agents uncovered a plot whereby Lincoln was to be attacked in Baltimore on February 23rd, 1861. He sent one of his agents, Kate Warren, to Baltimore ahead of the trip, and she was able to befriend family members of the conspirators that solidified the details of the conspiracy. Lincoln was disguised as Kate Warren's disabled brother for the leg of the trip from Philadelphia to Baltimore. The train arrived in Baltimore at 3 a.m. and departed without incident, and at 6 a.m. With Lincoln making it to D.C., of course, unscathed. So that's the end of kind of what he was up to prior to the Civil War. I had no idea that he worked for the railroad and that Lincoln worked for the railroad, and George McClellan, who I think was a general. I think that's later on in the story. Yeah, he was a general during the Civil War.
Yeah, it's quite stunning that you said that he assisted with the Underground Railroad.
That's what the book itself called it rumors. So I couldn't, I didn't do an entirely scholarly dive into it, but
just based on, my past and present understanding of law enforcement, it seems that would be antithetical to the interests of a detective agency to assist the slaves.
All right. I think that, I think it's rumors at best for most of it, but
yeah,
that's what the book said. So who knows?
Yeah, it's very interesting nonetheless.
Yeah. Okay. Now we'll get to the Civil War era. So after the start of the Civil War, Pinkerton wrote President Lincoln offering his services to spy on the Confederacy. His old friend, now General George McClellan, soon asked Pinkerton to set up a military intelligence operation for the Army Division of Ohio. Pinkerton sent agents disguised as Confederate soldiers and sympathizers throughout the South to gather information. He even went on at least one mission himself, gathering information on Confederate fortifications and plans in the Deep South during the summer of 1961. He spent 3 days in Memphis, Tennessee, before being recognized, collecting information from slaves building fortifications around the city. One of those slaves informed him he had been discovered. So he left Memphis. Rather than head back to the north, he rode to Jackson, Mississippi, scouting roads and fortifications for a few days. He then apparently decided to go and get a shave, and that didn't go well because the barber recognized him from being a customer of his in Chicago. And that night he left, returning to Cincinnati to report his findings to McClellan. So this part, to me, I thought was like, you've got the tie-ins with Lincoln and McClellan, right, spilling over into the Civil War, and now you have tie-ins in his personal life spilling over into the Civil War. I just thought those were kind of interesting, unrelated connections, I guess. Related because of the Civil War, but otherwise unrelated. Why the guy that was shaving him in Jackson, Mississippi was also his customer in Chicago. I have no idea how that happened. Doesn't say, but interesting nonetheless.
It's a reminder of how small the world is. Like, it was definitely small then, but like, right. You see these kinds of things now. Like, it is a small world in the end.
Yeah, totally. All right. So he continued working for McClellan after he took command of the Army of the Potomac. This proved in part to be McClellan's undoing. McClellan used information gathered by Pinkerton's spies to make his command decisions, but the information was no good. Pinkerton's agents were not trained in military operations and woefully underestimated Confederate forces prior to McClellan's Peninsula campaign and again at the Battle of Antietam. Because of the bad intel, McClellan chose not to pursue General Lee across the Potomac, citing equipment shortages and fear of overextending his forces. McClellan was accused by Lincoln of being overly cautious and not taking enough forward action, subsequently relieving him of command and ending his military career in November of 1862. I couldn't really find a date, but at some point after that, Pinkerton claimed that he was the chief of the United States Secret Services. But this was a flat out lie, as each individual army command had their own intelligence unit. He ended up resigning his position after McClellan's firing, but continued working for the government, investigating claims of property loss because of the war, and then returned to Chicago after the war. And I think, the property loss thing is probably, I'm sure, just some parts of the, just people's houses being raided by troops from everywhere for food or clothing or whatever. But it wouldn't surprise me if that property loss also had something to do with slaves. But it didn't say that. That's just my conjecture. All right. Post-Civil War. This is where it gets wild. I thought. All right. So after the war, some veterans formed gangs, many of whom robbed banks and trains. Pinkerton agents were hired by banks and railroad companies to hunt down those gangs. The first major post-Civil War gang the Pinkertons went after was the Reno Gang. And the Reno Gang operated in Indiana and Missouri in the late 1860s, robbing banks and treasuries. In October of 1866, they robbed the Ohio and Mississippi Railway Express car, and it is considered one of the first major train robberies in American history. They followed that up, over the next few years, committing various robberies, stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars. So these are not small-time criminals at this point. That's a lot of money back then. In 1867, the Adams Express Company hired the agency to hunt down the Reno Gang. After a series of robberies in Missouri, Pinkerton arrested both John Reno and Frank Sparks. The Reno Gang continued under the leadership of Frank Reno, which is John's brother. And on May 22nd, 1868, they robbed Adams Express stealing nearly $96,000, which ended up being their last successful robbery. In July of 1868, they attempted to rob another express line, but were driven off by the guards inside. The Pinkertons chased them into a nearby forest. The gang broke up shortly after, with Frank Reno and Charles Anderson heading to Canada, where the Pinkertons captured them in Windsor, which of course is right across the border from Detroit, and brought them back to the States. After that, Pinkertons got involved with the infamous Jesse James. Before I get into the James brothers, any questions, comments?
So yeah, just remind us again what time period we're talking about.
So this is the 1860s, like
Okay,
just
right after the Civil War.
Right after the Civil War, yeah.
Okay.
So my probably not super informed memory of it would be this is when they started trying to get the railroad all the way across the country.
Yeah, Transcontinental Railroad.
Yep. So you had, the Union, what ended up being the Union Pacific Railroad, right? But you had that happening. And then, of course, this is, the 1800s, late 1800s, like peak, like Old West timey stuff, right? Like bank robbers and I'm going to shoot you with my 6 guns type of stuff.
Right.
So,
and this is a couple of decades before the rapid industrialization where you get Carnegie and you get Rockefeller. And then
the Carnegie's coming in this story.
Okay.
Yeah.
I figured.
Yep.
Heather, do you have anything you want to comment?
No, I just keep thinking about Bonnie and Clyde, and I'm wondering where this fits in the context of them. Like, I cannot remember the time frame that they were, but this sounds all like
they were in the 1930s.
Okay. All right. It's a little after.
Okay. The James brothers, Jesse and Frank, were pro-secessionists in Civil War Missouri and were suspected of committing several atrocities against pro-Union communities. After the war, they took to other nefarious deeds. Like on December 7th, 1869, they robbed the Davies County Savings Association. Jesse shot and killed the cashier after mistaking him for a former pro-Union military officer. He later took to boasting about killing a major, implicating himself in both crimes. The St. Joseph Gazette, not sure where St. Joseph is, probably Missouri, provided details of the robbery and murder. John Newman Edwards was a former officer in the Confederate Army, and he was now editor at the Kansas City Times. And he saw the story in the Gazette. He was still bitter about the war, and his goal was to stir up former Confederates within the Democratic Party, wanting the ex-Confederates to resume their place of power. He began publishing propaganda to help their cause. Edwards started a myth that Jesse was the modern-day Robin Hood, stealing from the rich and giving to the poor, and glorifying their cause as noble and for the greater good. The James Gang was soon operating across multiple states, including Texas and West Virginia, eventually robbing trains owned by the Adams Express Company. If you'll remember, we mentioned them earlier with the Reno gang. Both the banks and Adams Express Company soon turned to the Pinkerton Agency to track them down. Pinkerton was interested in capturing them because of their pro-Confederate activity. Pinkerton began his operation by sending one of his agents, named Joseph Witcher, to infiltrate the farm of Zerelda James Samuel, the mother of Jesse and Frank. Zerelda was living there with her third husband and 4 children, including 8-year-old Archie. Witcher asked the local sheriff where Jesse lived, but was advised not to go out there. Not long after Witcher arrived, he was found dead in the woods with 6 bullet holes and a note pinned to him saying the same fate would happen to anyone else sent to find the James brothers.
Oh shit.
So that's like late 1860s. So we're gonna change gears a little bit and get into some of the labor stuff, and I think we'll get back to the James Gang later because it happens after some of this labor stuff. So I wanted to try and do it chronologically as opposed to doing all James Gang and then go back in time and do the labor stuff. So
Yeah, I get that. That makes sense.
So also in 1869, the Working Man's Benevolent Association gained roughly 20,000 members after a disaster at the Avondale mine in Luzerne County, Pennsylvania. Unrest and union activity in the coal areas escalated by the Panic of 1873, which caused high unemployment among the miners. Fear of the Molly Maguires, whom the mine owners conflated with the WBA and were said to have used violence against the British government in Ireland prior to coming to the United States, led by Franklin B. Gowan, president of the Philadelphia and Reading Railroad and of the Philadelphia and Reading Coal and Iron Company, to hire the Pinkertons in 1873. I'm going to read that again. That's a super long sentence. Okay, so the Molly Maguires were like a gang-ish, I guess, that were from Ireland, came to the United States, and were said to have harassed the British government before they came to the United States. The mine owners were led by Franklin B. Gowan, who was the president of the Philadelphia and Reading Railroad and the president of the Philadelphia and Reading Coal and Iron Company. So he chose to hire the Pinkertons in 1873. Gowan, considered the wealthiest anthracite coal mine owner in the world, wanted the Molly Maguire organization to break up. It was my understanding he thought that they were helping like with the union activities, and of course, you know, they hated that. Capitalists hate unions. So Pinkerton assigned the task to James McParland. McParland took the alias James McKenna and went undercover. He was to collect evidence against the Mollies. He also worked with another agent assigned to the Coal and Iron Police to coordinate eventual arrests and prosecutions. He was able to ingratiate himself with the Mollies, and while collecting information, the mine owners increased pressure to break up the unions. In December 1874, the mine owners announced a 20% pay cut. This led to the miners going on strike on January 1st, 1875. There was violence, but from the mine owners, not the miners. Edward Coyle, one of the union leaders, was murdered in March of 1875. The strike was broken by June of 1875 through imprisonment of the remaining strike leaders and violence directed at the miners. But miners associated with the Molly Maguires continued their campaign, and there were more incidents of violence as support for the Mollies increased. All right, let's see what's next. Okay, so McParland's work led him to believe vigilante action against the Mollies was needed. And on December 10th, 1875, 5 Mollies were attacked at home by masked men. 2 were killed and the others wounded. In addition, his reports were used as a basis for trials against members of the Mollies. Franklin B. Gowan had himself appointed as special prosecutor. As a result of the trials, 10 Molly Maguires were executed. And this lowered the Pinkertons in the eyes of the public, seeing them as tools of capital against labor. So Franklin B. Gowan is the guy that owns the railroad company and the mine in Philadelphia. And he had himself appointed special prosecutor of the people he was trying to put in jail. Like, you can't make that shit up. Like, just blatant corruption.
That's pretty funny.
Oh, yeah, it's crazy. So, all right. Let's see. Okay. Now we'll go back to the James brothers. So While all that was happening, the James brothers had continued what they were doing, and they robbed another Adams Express car, during which they wrote a telegram to the St. Louis Dispatch, asking one of the passengers to send it when they arrived at their next stop. Among other things, the note read, quote, "The most daring robbery on record. The robbers arrived at the station a few minutes before the train and arrested the agent and put him under guard. There is excitement in this part of the country," unquote. This went in the paper. Pinkerton read it, and he apparently was infuriated. And someone heard him say, "When we meet, it will be the death of one or both of us." So they were just totally like gaslighting Pinkerton by telling him that they arrested one of his agents that was supposed to prevent them from robbing the train. It's good stuff. Okay. On January 25th, 1875, the Pinkertons tried again to capture the James brothers. They surrounded Zerelda's house, and shortly after midnight, Pinkerton ordered the farmhouse to be firebombed. The stepfather of the James brothers, Mr. Samuels, woke up from the sound and ran into the kitchen to find the west end of the house on fire. After putting the flames out, they found a hand grenade on the floor. Not knowing what it was, he threw it into the fireplace, which exploded, wounding Samuels.
Oh, fuck.
Yeah. Also, Zerelda's arm was shattered a few inches above the right wrist, and it later had to be amputated. And it killed the 8-year-old kid, Archie.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
Terrible
shit.
I can't even fucking imagine that.
They didn't know what a hand grenade was because they barely existed, right? And like he just kicks it into the fireplace. And
God.
Crazy.
Just
oh my god.
Unreal.
Fuck.
Totally unreal. The death of Archie Samuel was a public relations nightmare for Pinkerton. Jesse and Frank were not at the house at the time the boy was killed. And the Pinkertons came to be seen by the public as a group of ruthless thugs operating outside the law. And after that, Pinkerton was no longer contracted to go after gangs of thieves. Let's see. Okay. Allan Pinkerton died in Chicago on July 1st, 1884. The most widely accepted story said that he fell while walking his wife's poodle, tripping over the leash. He bit his tongue, which developed gangrene, and he died a few days later. After Allan's death, his two sons, Robert and William, took over operation of the agency. When I read that the first time, this is the funniest shit ever that could happen to a guy like Pinkerton. He fucking bites his tongue, tripping while walking his wife's dog, and gets gangrene and died. Like I said, that's the most widely accepted story according to the book. There were some other accounts, but I just went with the one they said was the most widely accepted. So who knows? But couldn't think of
There's so many stories from the 1800s though about people, and I feel like it was probably widely accepted because like people did die of like really dumb shit like that. Like
Right.
You would read about like a woman dying from like cramps, or a guy like fell in a gutter drunk and then died the next day. It's like
Right.
that seemed like there was a commonplace in the 1800s and early 1900s too, or at least in literature.
Sure. I think that was just the time, right? That they didn't have, all the medical research we have now, right?
Yeah.
The medicine and preventative measures to keep infections from happening, right?
Yeah.
So, at least not like we do now.
Yeah.
Okay. By the early 1890s, the agency had 2,000 active agents. The Pinkertons were involved in the Homestead steel strike of July 1892. During that dispute, several Pinkerton agents were killed and the rest forced to surrender to strikers after an armed standoff. That strike led to the Anti-Pinkerton Act being signed in 1893. It said that the federal government was now prohibited from hiring private investigators. I want to go ahead.
I said quote unquote.
Yeah, quote unquote. Yeah, I don't. We've seen all the coups, so from the 20th century. I did do a quick check about the Homestead strike because I had heard of it before I read this book, but I wanted to make sure I got like very high level main points. So a quick note from the Wikipedia page about Homestead Steelworks. It was owned by Andrew Carnegie of Carnegie Steel Company. And despite the failure at Homestead, the Pinkerton Agency was hired by companies to break strikes in Illinois, West Virginia, Michigan, New York, and Pennsylvania. So yeah, that was after the Allan died. His kids were running it then, but same bunch of jolly assholes as far as I can tell.
Yeah, and this is like the second part of why leftists, we'll talk about how law enforcement is just to protect private property and capitalism, right? Because they were first created as slave patrol watches.
Yep, the night watches, right?
And then to break up labor strikes for the sole purpose of protecting capitalists.
Right.
And their profits. Yeah, so
100%.
I like that you're pointing this out.
Yeah. All right. Now let's get back to the outlaws. This story's wild. I love it. So while the agency had stopped being contracted for capturing outlaws under Allan after the firebombing, they were involved with Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid well after Allan's death. So in the late 1890s, the Pinkertons began detective work, including coining the term. Wait a minute. Okay. Sorry. I'll start that over. In the late 1890s, the Pinkertons began detective work, including coining the term Wild Bunch in reference to Butch and Sundance, who had roughly 30 different people they worked with over the years. The Wild Bunch committed multiple robberies in the late 1890s. By November of 1900, they had a sheriff's posse on their tail. Cassidy and Sundance split up for a time, but had planned on meeting up again, which they did in Argentina. The Pinkertons had agents follow them to South America, and in 1903, the chief of police in Buenos Aires received a letter from Robert Pinkerton informing them of the whereabouts of the fugitives. They were not captured, as it was difficult to get to the region they were holed up in during the rainy season. The Pinkertons' involvement sort of trails off, according to the story, after this, and it wasn't again until 1906 when Cassidy and Sundance robbed a bank in Mercedes, Argentina, that they were located again. A local newspaper there ran a story about them, including pictures and mention of the robbers speaking English. After word got out, they were suspected of robberies all over South America. In 1908, the Bolivian Army was after Cassidy and Sundance for robbing the payroll of the Aramayo mines and claims to have seen both dead following a shootout with the army. The agency's anti-labor activities continued until the La Follette Committee hearings in 1937. And these led to Allan's great-grandson, Robert Jr., reorganizing the business to focus on personal and corporate security. In 1968, the agency was hired to escort the Mona Lisa on its voyage home from the United States. In 1999, a company called Securitas AB acquired the Pinkerton Agency and continues its work to this day. Got some few more notes here from the Pinkerton Wikipedia page. In December of 2018, Securitas AB issued a cease and desist order to the makers of the video game Red Dead Redemption 2 for using the Pinkerton name and badge likeness. They later withdrew their claim to the royalties, however. Didn't say why. In 2020, the Pinkertons were hired by Amazon to spy on warehouse workers for union activity. And if anyone has listened to the first episode of my show with Matt and Abby from Starbucks Workers United, you'll remember that Abby was at the Starbucks Chicago Roastery in 2023, the day they announced they were going to have a union vote. And while there, she was dodging Pinkertons. And of course, there were also videos on TikTok and stuff of showing the Pinkertons logo on security guards there. But yeah, her story in particular is pretty wild. Just being there, like undercover, quote unquote, because they had already unionized here in Madison, so they'd sent her down to Chicago to assault, which is pretty great. According to Pinkerton.com, they now operate in over 100 countries, providing comprehensive risk management. Their homepage has propaganda regarding organized retail crime, which of course isn't real, and is a phrase invented by the grifters of the retail store lobby, which you could probably do an entire episode just about that.
Yeah, I was gonna say too, like what the shock.
Yeah. Yep. And that's it. It's pretty wild, I thought. And so, I had no idea how in depth he got into shit.
No, it's super fascinating, Craig. I guess one of my biggest questions is, what are we talking about in terms of the gap in time between the establishment of the Pinkertons and the FBI?
I'd have to look it up, but the FBI was under Hoover, right? Like in the 1930s, right? That when Hoover was president? I'll look it up real quick.
Director.
Sorry, director, yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking either the 20s or the 30s, but I'm just wondering, was the Pinkerton Agency the one that preceded the FBI until there was a state-sponsored, law enforcement agency?
I'm not sure. We'd have to do a deep dive into the FBI. There's an episode.
Oh, fuck yeah. That'll put me on a list for sure.
I was just gonna say, you do the episode and then have a knock at the door by the time it's over.
Yeah, right. Yeah, totally. This a quick Google search here pulls up the wiki page and just said that Hoover was the head of the FBI from 1924 until 1972.
Yeah, he was there for fucking ever.
Yeah, I don't know if it started in 1924. Or I'm not going to read the rest of it right now, but
yeah, all good.
He was there forever. But yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if that was it. But it mentions the La Follette hearings in the story, and that happened in the 30s.
Yeah.
So they had already from those hearings, and that I think that was. I don't know. I'd have to go back and look. I think I'm mixing up parts of the story. But
yeah. And just going back to the comment that Heather made about Bonnie and Clyde, the 1930s is the heyday of bank robbers in the U.S. It's following the Great Depression.
Right.
Got, Bonnie and Clyde. You got George Babyface Nelson. You got Al Capone. You got all the fallout from Prohibition.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of factors playing into there, but it's really interesting to talk about.
Yeah, just anecdotally, it wouldn't surprise me if the FBI came to be because of Prohibition. They realized they needed a federal agency to crack down on importing across the border. Would be my guess, but or smuggling across the border. But yeah. That would be my guess.
And I'm not sure how old the ATF is, but I'm thinking that the ATF might have literally been created because of Prohibition.
Well, that could be, yeah.
So I just quickly Googled it, and it says that the FBI was founded in 1908 to investigate corruption in the government.
Okay. How's that going?
And you said ATF?
Yeah.
Let me look up ATF. So why was the ATF founded?
I feel like the ATF was from the 70s, but I don't know.
To protect communities. Oh, the ATF. What the fuck? The ATF was created in the 1970s.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You're correct on that. And it was to protect communities from violent criminals, criminal organization, and illegal trafficking of firearms and drugs.
And then, I
So,
mean, you guys are old enough to remember Waco.
Mm-hmm.
not one. I don't remember Waco 100%, but I did watch the mini series that they did. I don't remember who did it. Was it Netflix or? It was very good. It was incredibly good on Waco, and yeah. What about the DEA? I wonder if the DEA was the DEA created. Oh, the DEA was in the 1970s also, just for drugs.
Yeah, so I think just based on all the research that I've done with the cannabis episode that I did with Erica,
Yeah.
I think that Nixon declared public drug use, or he declared drug use public enemy number one in
Yeah,
1970. So that makes
yeah.
sense.
Yeah. Nixon's a fucking
But also
jackass.
like, like what politicians say they've created something for is never really the full truth, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I mean, like, so like one of these agencies could have been, like, I don't know.
So like it's super funny that the FBI claims that they were created to investigate government corruption. And
Yeah.
for decades and decades and decades, and literally like up to this day, it's just been infatuated with corruption. And
It's gotten worse.
and it was established by J. Edgar Hoover, who was the most fucking corrupt piece of shit of all time.
Yeah.
Racist fucking asshole. Like, you can't even describe all the insidiousness that man has caused for generations throughout U.S. history.
Yeah.
And then yeah, go ahead, Heather. Sorry.
I was gonna say, in politics, it's only wrong if somebody else is doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look at what that guy's doing over there. Look at him.
Yeah.
Pay no attention to what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Look at him. Look at him. Yeah. Totally like that.
Whataboutism.
Yeah. One of the now that I read this back in the fall and wrote this in the fall, and I kind of hadn't looked at it since then. I looked at it yesterday just to a little refresher, but I didn't remember all of it. And I found it interesting that Pinkerton seemed to have started as like a halfway decent guy, right? Like he was part of the People's Charter before he left Scotland, to try and help people get represented in Parliament and get a right to vote. He was purportedly helping with the Underground Railroad and was an abolitionist. I don't know how you go from that to almost the opposite of that, right? Like, and didn't say anywhere like what happened, like if something happened in his life that made that like make him change his mind, or if he just maybe he always sucked. I don't know.
Did you find anything in your research that explained like why he felt sympathetic towards the slaves?
And I don't remember off the top of my head.
Okay, because like I was just wondering, because you mentioned John Brown too. Like, was he like ultra religious? Was this like a moral like crusade or something?
Yeah, it didn't. I don't remember it saying anything about that. And like I said, a lot of that stuff about the book itself says rumors in some cases with the Underground Railroad for sure. They said that was a rumor. So who knows if that part of it's true, but it's hard to say. Like, just
because it's so weird, right? It's just
it is
weird.
It's weird. Like, yeah, I don't know. It's goofy as shit.
It's so ass backwards from like what our conventional thinking is.
Right. But yeah, it's I didn't know that he had come from Scotland at all. It makes sense because there was a lot of that happening in the 1800s for sure, in particular. But like, I had no idea, so that was a surprise to me. I feel like maybe the fact that his dad was a cop and died when he was a kid, maybe that had something to do with it. Once he grew up and had kids, maybe that kind of took hold. This is just conjecture on my part. I have no idea if that's actually how his like psychology worked, but it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, that would make sense. I was also just thinking about like Sherlock Holmes being written in the late 19th century, and maybe that I don't know. I'm speculating because this is a topic that I admittedly don't know too much about, but I'm just wondering like if this possibly could have been a motivation.
Yeah, very well could have been.
I also think like at the time, like they didn't have the radio, they didn't have TV, they didn't have social media, and so I think a lot of people just had to investigate and figure things out on their own. And I think maybe for a lot of people that ended up I guess a career path, if that's what you'd call it. You know what I mean? Like,
Sure.
I mean, I mean, it just, and people want answers to what's going on around them. And you think about all the things that were going on, like right before the Civil War, during the Civil War, after the Civil War, during Prohibition in the 1930s. I mean, there was a lot of shit going on and people just did not have answers. And so naturally, I think you're going to have like figures that come forward that somehow become kind of investigative, somehow get into a path like sort of you know what I mean? Like just
yeah,
just to explain what's going on around them, even if it's just to themselves. And then they fall down that path of what they end up doing.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. You know what else I was just thinking about, guys, is I was actually just thinking about the prevalence of serial killers. Like H.H. Holmes at this time is like the United States' first prominent serial killer, and this takes place in Chicago. And then also in the late 19th century, you have Jack the Ripper in England.
Right.
And to your point, Jordan, about serial killers, like I think all the time about how so many of like our investigative agencies now, like the FBI, like I can't believe that they're so big and there are so many of them, because there's so much technology that sort of makes their job not like it's very difficult to get away with murder and crime with DNA, right? With DNA evidence, or there's cameras fucking everywhere. I mean, if you're anywhere in public, you need to assume you're being filmed, right? And and so it's like more difficult to get away with it now, right? And I think that probably back then you needed like more people taking on those, jobs.
Yeah,
sure.
I think, besides flat out incompetence by law enforcement to get away with murder now, it needs to be an orchestrated cover up.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Like I think about Diddy, right? Like all this stuff that's coming out about Diddy. Like one of the most fascinating things to me is the fact that he has allegedly, I'm saying allegedly because this hasn't been proven in a court of law yet. He allegedly has knowledge of at least 11 unsolved murders, including Tupac and Biggie.
What?
Really?
Yep.
Dang.
And that's like, and Tupac and Biggie, like, that's one of the things where, again, like, how do they not know?
Well, I mean, I have no idea how they don't know about that because it's so high profile, right?
Yeah.
But I think.
Well, the guy that shot Tupac, he's actually standing trial in June.
Oh,
Yeah,
is
I
he?
heard. Yeah, the Vegas PD finally caught him or something, right? Recently.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Guy that supposedly shot and killed Tupac is standing trial in June.
Wow.
Yeah. 25 years later, 30 years later.
Yeah,
I don't
this
even know when Tupac
this
died.
was in September of '96.
96. Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, there's the skeletons in the closet are about to be released, and
Wow.
I'm following the news on Diddy pretty closely because it's fascinating to me, and it's like, you know, it's going back to like what Cat Williams was saying earlier in the year, like 2024 is going to be a year of truth, and then we saw the documentary that came out about Nickelodeon.
Mm-hmm.
And I think just we're ripping the Band-Aid off of everything that we kind of had like surface knowledge about, but now like it's like all the bullshit is being uncovered.
A lot of it.
But yeah,
for sure. Well,
that was a lot of rambling, but sorry.
No, that's all right. Well, you know, and it kind of is coming, like, more people are looking into things depending on what it is, of course. But like a lot of it has to do with Harvey Weinstein.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
that's what I was thinking about.
People are just like, all right, fine. This guy got away with this for what, 30 years, 40 years? And more people are digging into shit, and with social media and so many different places to get news, like any story, freelance writers, there's a lot of people out there that want to do stuff like that now, right? Where even 20 years ago we didn't have that. Right?
Yeah.
Right, and I think people are just fed up with the open secrets that exist within the entertainment industry too.
Yeah.
So like, you know,
sure.
you've got A-listers, whether it's the music industry, whether it's Hollywood, that have all kinds of inside knowledge about what's been going on for decades. But they don't actually speak about it. Everybody knows about it, but nobody really comes forward. But now, as you alluded to, Craig, following Me Too, things feel a lot different.
I mean, more shit's being uncovered. Which is good. I would have to defer to the people that are continuously oppressed by all of these people to see if things are getting better or not, because I can't speak on that.
I'm just saying, I feel like people feel more comfortable at least exposing this bullshit.
Do you know why I think that is? I have a theory about this. This is very tangential, but so it's not just A-listers in the industry that know about all this bullshit. Like you have like studios like Nickelodeon, Disney, you know, Fox, all of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, Fox is owned by Disney now, but you get my point. You have all the studios, and that's where you have like A-list people, but then you have like hundreds and hundreds, probably thousands of vendors, right? You've got dry cleaners, and you've got vendors like where Nick works, where my husband works, and a lot of them know about all this shit too, because they're there and they're witnessing it. But a lot of them, you know, I think a lot of them have kept quiet because, you know, their job kind of depends on it. It's a very toxic industry, right?
Yeah.
For a lot of reasons. This is just one of them. I think that the strikes last year changed a lot in Hollywood, and it wasn't just like with the contracts they got, but the relationships between A-list actors and like lower level actors, because a lot of lower level actors do feel like they got fucked in the contract.
Yep.
Right.
And a lot of vendors. A lot of vendors got their entire lives destroyed.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of changed the dynamic because they no longer feel like, well, I keep my mouth shut, I keep my head down, I do my job, I do what I'm supposed to do, and I'm gonna continue to prosper in this industry. Well, that didn't pan out. A lot of people, below the line ended up getting really fucked.
Yeah.
And so I think now a lot of them have nothing left to lose. That's what I think. I think a lot of people don't have shit to lose anymore, so they're going to speak up, and you're going to have a lot more people speaking up, like you said, Jordan, and Me Too, and a lot of other movements. I think have kind of like acted as, what is it, like a like a avalanche, that where like the ground is starting to shake, and the snow is starting to shake up, and I think that the industry just on the whole just was forever changed because, and I'm not the only person that has said that. I mean, a lot of people have acknowledged that. And I think you're going to hear more people because they don't have anything left to lose anymore. And so you're going to have a lot more of this, the people that have been, as you said, Craig, oppressed kind of the most. I think we're going to see more of them coming out because they don't have to take it anymore because
Right.
they're, a lot of them already lost what they were going to lose. So why not?
Well,
That's my tangential theory
That's
on it.
really, 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 really well said.
I think so too. Yeah. I mean, yeah, super well said. And I agree that as people's material conditions continue to degrade,
Mm-hmm.
they have less and less to lose by speaking out and by striking and by, doing what they can to counteract some of the horse shit that we get from the capitalist class on a daily fucking basis. Right.
Yeah.
And like, I think I saw a quote from Sean Fain from UAW recently, and he said something to the effect of the working class has figured out how long they've and how badly they've been getting screwed.
Yeah.
Class consciousness, baby.
Right. Class consciousness. Yeah. And he's right. I think they have, especially with what happened in 2020 and continues to happen now. When the CDC came out this year and said, we're not going to, essentially, we don't care if you even, like, there's no quarantine time if you get COVID now.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
Hasn't
and
it
one
been
of the,
like 2 years?
No, it was just this year.
It was just this year. It was 5 days for quite a while, and now they got rid of that.
That's what I was
altogether.
thinking of when they shortened the isolation period.
Yeah. And like the only reason they're doing that is because the businesses can't function.
Yeah.
And like everybody knows that that the workers have the employers by the balls now, quote unquote.
Yeah.
And like there's
all kinds
people
of,
know it. Yeah.
There's all kinds of fucking companies that are just forcing everybody to come into the office 4 or 5 days a week now.
For no goddamn reason.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. It's stupid.
Like, I think I've talked about this in a podcast previously, but they've got like these bait and switch remote jobs where like, they'll post that a job is remote and then they're like, oh, you get to work from home on Fridays. That's not a fucking remote job.
Yeah, no.
That's not even hybrid.
Right.
It's just like fucking like comical levels of gaslighting.
Yeah, they're fucking liars. They're just lying. Like so much could be fixed if there was federal regulations about how job postings have to be.
Yes.
Oh,
right?
Yep.
Like if you're going to post a job in the United States,
you better
have someone do work for you. This is how you have to do it. What the job is, how much it pays, how many days a week you're required to come into the office. Like all of these things should be posted up front. No fucking around. If you're going to use Indeed, I shouldn't be able to upload my resume that I typed out and got, proofread and everything. Why should I have to upload that to Indeed? And then I turn around and see that there's a company hiring. They've got a job opening. So I go and I start filling it out and I upload my resume. And then they ask me all of the same questions that I just answered with my resume.
Yeah.
You know what else?
It's a waste of everybody's fucking time.
Yeah.
No, for real. You know what else I heard recently on LinkedIn? You know how it will tell you, like, supposedly how many people have applied to that job? It's totally bullshit.
I'm sure.
It's just people that clicked the apply button and didn't even necessarily go through the full application process.
Sure. Because clicking the apply button is something that a software company can easily track.
Yeah. So like it says like 700 people applied to the job, but really it could be like 100.
Could be 10.
Yeah, it could be 5.
Yeah, we don't,
So you just don't even consider it, and then you just like fuck yourself.
Yeah.
So I saw a really interesting TikTok video by someone who used to program at LinkedIn, and there's a person going by my house. So she was talking about how she was talking about two things. One, about how when you hear the jobs report and they say however many jobs created, those are like how many jobs listings there are. Not how many people were actually hired.
Yeah.
That's the first thing. But then the other thing she said is that companies use LinkedIn is a total joke now because companies use LinkedIn, Monster, and what was the other one? Indeed, to advertise their business. They're just posting jobs on there to get people to click through for advertising.
Sure.
To their business. So they don't even really have those jobs available. They're just using it as another free advertising
marketing
platform.
tool.
Yeah. And LinkedIn job postings are kind of like you almost have to take them with a grain of salt. Because chances are it's just an advertisement for the company actually, which is crazy.
Yeah.
Like that's how I felt for a long time too. That you're actually just, and it sucks. Like it fucking sucks to admit that like you're just wasting your time looking for jobs.
Yeah.
Because it's a full-time job in itself looking for work.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah.
And then just to like, grasp the reality that you're just a hamster on a fucking wheel.
Right. Right. Well, and what's really handcuffing a lot of people, I think, is there are entry-level positions being filled by people with degrees that weren't being filled by people with degrees even 10 years ago or 5 years ago. Right. And it's hurting it's the people that get the jobs. They're low paying jobs because they're entry level generally. And so if you have a degree, you might have school debt to pay. So, which isn't going to pay you enough to pay off your debt anytime soon. Right. And then the people that would have normally got those jobs don't have work at all.
Yeah.
Right. So like and you compound that with the fact that the generation after mine, I'm the tail end of Gen X. Like they were all told to go to school. You want a high paying job, go to school, get a degree. Yeah, right. And now they do that. And you see job postings for people with master's degrees that pay $15 an hour. Like, go fuck yourself. That's that's total horseshit.
Yeah. We've got, I think it's Chris that made this point from the Alt Left podcast. We've got all these like hyper educated households where we have 2-3 people inside one household that hold master's degrees and still like can barely pay the rent.
Yeah.
I can see that for sure.
And this isn't like some fucking bullshit like, oh, they shouldn't have majored in art history or whatever. Like, fuck that. Like, if you get an advanced degree, you should be able to make it.
Like, yes. Yeah. Right. You shouldn't have to live.
Not everybody needs to be a fucking engineer or a lawyer or an accountant.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's fucking nonsense. It just is. Like, yeah, it's truly like just irritating beyond belief now when I see some of the shit I see when I read the newspapers. I don't read the print anymore, but online, when I see something and read about some jackass CEO saying some dumb thing, it's like, all right, you're just a fucking total gaslighting asshole now. Like,
yeah, and like I frequently repost the op-eds that come out of the Wall Street Journal,
ugh,
and they're just fucking asinine.
it's just
like one of the ones that I posted a few months back, you guys might remember, when they were like, college should be more like prison.
fucking assholes.
Or they were like, maybe you should skip breakfast to save money.
No, nope.
Or that fucking Kellogg's CEO who's like,
Oh,
well, this economy is great business for
Just eat
us.
cereal for dinner.
yeah. Like, okay. Like, you know, yeah, it's, you can't feed kids cereal. I mean, you can. They need more than cereal every day. They need fruits and vegetables, motherfucker. They're kids.
Yeah, it's like, it's like every day, like we're just like being introduced to a different Bond villain.
It is totally. So we totally are. So do you guys remember last May? Maybe it was June by that time, but I forget which college it was. Somewhere out east. They had Zaslav, the head of Warner Brothers, come and give the commencement address. This is in the middle of the writer's strike. And he's up there on stage, like all fire and brimstone, like there's people that are coming for you and they're going to do this and they're going to do that. And like the people just started chanting, pay your writers. Like all the students in the crowd were just like, pay your writers, like over and over and over again. And it was like, you have totally lost the fucking thread, buddy. You're talking to fucking 20-year-old, 22-year-old kids who lived through the most bullshit part of capitalism, like in the last like 50 years, right? Like they see what's happening every day on their telephone. Like they know you're full of shit, buddy. Like go fuck yourself.
Yeah, I feel like if capitalism is gonna fall, it's gonna be because of Gen Z and Gen Alpha.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah. I know my kid's sick of hearing me talk about it.
Or
they're 14.
Yeah, like,
well, is it going to be because of Gen Z and Gen Alpha though, or is it going to be because of
the
these
material conditions?
Yeah, these greedy fucks who have extracted everything they could. I mean, I think you've reached a point where there's nothing left.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
in a lot of spots, there's not.
Yeah, there's nothing left that you can possibly squeeze from people. And I think it's actually because of this fucking the greed, you know.
It's off the charts.
Right.
And like, you know, when we talk about like, I always think it's interesting when people talk about like corporate greed and how that's like the sole cause of inflation. It's really not the sole cause of inflation, but you can tie just about everything that does cause inflation back to some kind of greed, right? Like, why is the deficit what it is? Well, because of all the fucking bailouts, all the fucking Great Recession bailouts, and then the fucking COVID bailouts and the PPP loans. Like, that's all. I mean, and that is technically greed, right?
Yep.
I mean, it's
you
even
you can't tie it back.
That's even that's even beyond greed. That's actually like tapping into like full on like fucking state capitalism.
Yeah, and like the tax cuts for the wealthy are what drive a lot of the deficit, because we saw it happen in 2017 with the Tax Cuts and Corporate Welfare Act that Trump signed.
Yeah.
Like that added like 10 trillion to the debt in 5 years.
Yeah.
In 5 fucking years. And
when
guess who's
that...
sharing the brunt of it?
Yeah.
You, us three.
Yeah.
Like our taxes are going to keep going up for another 3 years.
Yeah.
Because of that.
And if we get back to like the FBI and the Pinkerton Agency, right? Like these agencies literally exist to fucking stop some of this shit. Like, come on. The fucking FBI exists to investigate corruption in government. How do you not have fucking investigations against some of this fucking, it's like smash and grab of tax dollars? Like all these fucking Republicans and even Democrats who took out fucking forgiven PPP loans. Like, how do you not have them being investigated? Or how is it that, like, the legislature is legally allowed to commit insider trading? Like, how the fuck is Nancy Pelosi, I'm sorry, Nancy Pelosi getting away with what she gets away with? And Dianne Feinstein did it too. And so when you get back to these agencies, why are they not doing what they literally exist to do?
Yeah, like, exactly, Heather. We have people in Congress that have been there, you know, for decades, making $100,000 a year, that are now worth $100 million.
Yeah.
Right. Yep. Mm-hmm.
How the fuck does that work without insider trading?
That's exactly what's happening. Well, you know, the executive of the modern state is but a committee for managing the common affairs of the whole bourgeoisie. Like that's what's happening, right? They're not going to step on each other's necks, right? They're going after the people they can get. It's why the IRS doesn't. We've seen it a little bit in the last 6 months. Where
started on the IRS, man.
No, I know you got a beef, but like you, right? Like the IRS doesn't have the resources to go after the people they should be going after, which is the, you know, billions of dollars that are not paid by people who cheat the system.
Yeah. What about the fucking Panama Papers?
Right. They have the money to go after people like you because you don't have any money. I mean, I know, right? You can't contest it. What are you going to do? You're going to hire a lawyer at $1,000 an hour in California to try and get you to not pay $2,000 in your fucking taxes. Like, no, you're fucked.
Here I am making $60K a year.
Right. Right. Like, no, they're gonna go after you. They're not going after the guy making $600,000 a day. He can afford lawyers to tie him up in court for 40 years and never pay. Right.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's fucking horseshit. You know, and what's stupid about the taxes thing is like everyone complains, well, we can't, if you do universal healthcare, taxes will go up. No, they can be moved. You could actually lower taxes if you just moved some money from places where it doesn't need to be, right? And start collecting people who are cheating the taxes, not people who have, you know, who pay less than they should because the rate is less than it should be. I'm talking about getting money from the people that don't pay at all because they have the resources to not pay, right?
Right. And you could just tell people too. So, you know, given that the reason that you're supposed to pay taxes is so that you can get services back in return. The fact that we pay taxes and still have to pay out of pocket for things like healthcare.
Right. It's horseshit.
We actually effectively pay a higher tax rate than any countries in Europe.
Yeah.
That are getting all of this shit. Like what? I don't fucking care about the tax rate. I care about what I'm getting back for my taxes.
Right.
Yeah.
So if I have to pay taxes and I still have to pay out of pocket for everything on top of that,
right,
that's way worse than just having high taxes.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
It's it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, it's fucking.
Like I look around like in California. Sorry, Heather. I'll just make this
No,
point.
go ahead.
Like, just looking around, just all the fucking taxes that we pay to live in California. And we have the
Yeah.
46th shittiest roads out of 50 states.
That's fucking awful.
Like we pay a fortune to live here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
no
do.
Shit.
You know what I was thinking though is like I do believe that this tax season I am noticing a bit of a tide turning, and people like the incompetence of Joe Biden and the ineptitude of his administration to have like a finger on the pulse of what average Americans are dealing with has ended up in so many people having taxes due this year that weren't expecting it, that had no like increase in pay, no changes whatsoever, and they're still like, how am I fucking owing? Like, I'm seeing so many people talk about it online. I've talked to people about it, out in the community, and so I think that people are, and I don't just think it. I've had people ask me like, what am I getting for my taxes? I'm not getting anything. The cops aren't like showing up when I call them because somebody's prowling my yard. They're like off at the fucking outlet mall harassing people over there.
Or just hanging out at the fucking beach.
Yeah, or harassing homeless people, which we see all the time now. The military will clearly, I mean, like with COVID, people learned that the government will let us all get killed in a heartbeat if they, I mean, we learned, I think people learned and are waking up to this idea that even people that like don't wear masks, didn't get vaccines, they still also are like, yeah, they'll let us get fucking slaughtered.
Yeah, they don't give a shit.
They don't give a shit. And that's why like when the Iran thing happened the other day, I was like, oh my God, this is it. Because they will let us get bombed off the fucking planet. And I think more and more people are realizing we're paying taxes to be sacrificed.
Yep.
And we get nothing in return. And I'm hearing more people get that now. And it's because Joe Biden has failed to fix the tax code, really do, implement any kind of strategic policies that deliver things for people in the long term. And the biggest fuck up, in my view, was the child tax credit, letting that go.
Yeah, that was crap.
They fucking lifted people out of poverty and then slammed them right the fuck back in. And that's like with that, I think about that, like, that Plato's cave, so the Socrates thing, like when the people, you're ripped out of the cave and you see the light and then you're shoved back in and you have no choice. And I think about that with everybody now. And I think that's where we're seeing so much discontent because people are like, you aren't doing fucking shit for me. And so I do think that tide is turning. Yeah.
Well, and one thing about the taxes, I think too. So you had the Tax Cuts and Corporate Welfare Act from 2017 that lowered taxes on everybody to start, right?
Mm-hmm.
It froze the corporate tax rate, and that can never change unless there's another law passed. But it only lowered it on people making under, like, for sure 100 grand, but maybe 200. It only lowered it temporarily.
Yeah.
It's increasing incrementally now for the last couple of years up until 2027 back. I don't know if it's going back to what it was in 2016 or not, but it is going back up. And
I don't know a single person that's paying lower taxes.
Well,
I don't know if they are or not.
That's because you don't know anybody that's paying that makes,
Yeah, I don't hang out with millionaires and billionaires.
No, but like you have
either. That's because I don't know any fucking millionaires.
Yeah, I mean you have the incremental increases happening, but then you also have the rise in wages in some sectors we've seen in the last 2 years, right?
Yeah.
So you have people who were making less money and were getting taxed less even 3 years ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's say they were lucky enough to get back to work with a higher paying job. they're making more money, and the tax rate's going back up. So they're entering a higher tax bracket in some cases. So they're going to get taxed more just because of that. Plus the rate's going back up. So they're feeling it twice in that regard, right? Yeah. Plus their material conditions are, for a lot of people, are worse now than they were at the end of 2019. So like, it doesn't take much to screw people now. Like, it takes less bullshit to screw someone than it did 5 years ago.
Well, the inflation since 2021 is like 33% for overall inflation.
Yeah, that's insanity. And like, it's not it's not even inflation. Like, I understand that prices are going up, but that's not run-of-the-mill natural inflation. It's all of the companies that didn't make money in 2020 and early 21 are trying to get all that money back.
And even
that is what's happening.
And even ones that saw record profits, it's never fucking enough.
Ever. It won't ever be, because it requires infinite growth.
Yeah. Which
you get fired. If you're an executive, you get fired if your company doesn't make the projections they're supposed to make.
Yeah.
They could still be in the black and make billions, but you made $5 billion less than you were supposed to, so you're going to get canned. It's like, dude, go fuck yourself.
Yeah.
Go fuck yourself all the way to the fucking bank. Like, I can't fucking stand it.
I can't wait until we have an episode where we bring on a couple of climate scientists and they just break down the fucking absurdity that is infinite economic growth.
Yeah.
Oh, well, and you can't, like, it's just not possible to have infinite growth in a finite system. It's not possible.
And you can't have that when you have one planet
right
that has a limited amount of resources.
Right. Yeah.
It's not gonna fucking happen. Like, or literally, like, we see it. We're burning this planet to the ground.
Dude, the fucking Gulf of Mexico was on fire a few years ago.
I remember
that.
The fucking water was on fire.
Yeah.
Yeah, I fucking remember that in like 2021 when the Gulf of Mexico was on fire. And then I've seen all those clips too, even going back to like the 1960s with like the Ohio River being on fire.
Yep. So I just got done reading that Braiding Sweetgrass.
Uh-huh.
And in there she talks about the lake that Syracuse, New York is founded on, and how it was so badly polluted from the 1940s through the 1970s that they outlawed fishing from it in the 1970s, because there was a chemical company that had its factory on the shores, and it would just dump chemical waste sludge into the lake.
Yeah.
And like, it's killed off almost everything in there. And like, it has its own ecosystem, and like its own, like, it brought all these non-native like plants in that just choke everything else out around the shoreline. And like, they started some restoration of it, but it just got polluted for years and years and years, just dumping the waste in, and no one did anything about it. They just let them keep doing it. And it was like, the original company did it, then it got bought out, and they kept doing it. And then, and people knew it was happening, and people told them to stop, and the fucking government didn't stop them. It's like, it's one of the most just horrific things I've read about as far as pollution goes. And like, they couldn't get enough salt. There was like an inland salt marsh there that they dried up. And then they couldn't get enough salt after that. So they started drilling holes in the limestone and pumping it out of the ground. Like, there were like salt caves in the ground that they started pumping the salt out of. And then that started causing issues with the river upstream of the lake, and having like these weird like mud volcanoes or some shit that like wrecked a bunch of shit and just dumped tons and tons of silt into the river, like that just got carried down to the lake, is just fucking horrible. And like that's just a microcosm of what's happening everywhere.
Yeah.
What we saw with what Texaco and now Chevron, who bought Texaco, did in Ecuador, right? What Donziger got locked up for.
Fuck yeah.
Right? Like that's happening fucking everywhere.
Like the environmental destruction that has happened to West Virginia. Like West Virginia is a gorgeous state that has just been decimated by the coal mining industry.
Yep.
Like permanent environmental destruction. Things like acid rain. In a picturesque place that's it's just so sad.
Yeah.
It's fucking brutal. And I can attest directly to West Virginia because I've driven directly through West Virginia on the West Virginia Turnpike, which goes right through the Appalachians from Charleston over to Virginia. And it's unbelievable drive through the mountains. Just unbelievable. But there's a lot of shit that's wrecked there. You can see it when you're driving by. You're like, oh, Jesus, what the hell?
Yeah. Where do we go from here? We got to fucking abolish capitalism.
Fucking A. Fucking A, right.
I'm tired of every day looking out the window and it's still capitalism.
It's still fucking capitalism. Yeah. Well, I think it's gonna, I'm guessing, before we ever get any like total abolition of it, we're gonna end up with like full blown like oligarchy, where you end up just having corporations with their own private police forces do it. Just there's no state cops anymore. It's just corporations run everything. I think that's more likely to happen before we see any kind of like actual abolition of capitalism.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, that's sort of, I guess, the end of capitalism, because then that's full on fascism at that point, which we're pretty close to already.
Well, right. And that just like circles back around to the theme of this episode, right? Which is the Pinkertons, which is a private enforcement agency.
Yep.
To protect against the interests of workers.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I actually just, like, right when you were starting this episode, I saw a tweet that said, "Here is a sobering thought." This is from Michael Slipko. He's just he's on the left. He does a lot of, like, commentary. He said, "Here is a sobering thought. What if fascism is inherently the natural conclusion to a capitalist society?" And all these people underneath in the comments are agreeing and saying, it is inevitable. Here's this follow-up. It is inevitable that the U.S. is heading into a fascist era, no matter who wins this year. It took a world war to stamp out only one country's fascist denouement. And
Well, Heather, do you remember the episode that we did about Upton Sinclair?
Yeah.
The quote where Upton Sinclair says fascism is just capitalism plus murder?
Yeah.
Pretty much. That makes sense to me. Yeah. Sadly.
Me too. That's fucking on the nose.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree. It'll be, the corporations hiring private law enforcement agencies to crack down against workers. It'll be everything that we saw at the beginning of the 20th century, and then the 19th century as well.
And I want to say, if they aren't already, because if you pay attention, if you just drive around sometime and pay attention, there are all these private security companies all over the fucking place now.
Mm-hmm.
And, like we see them, like we live right across the street from the hospital. They hire private security now.
Yep.
To stand outside, and the mall has private security. Fucking Chick-fil-A has a security guard there, an armed security guard. He is an armed security guard with a bulletproof vest on. I see the Chick-fil-A, Wendy's, Delta, like there's like a coffee shop over there we go to all the time, and I see this guy standing outside Chick-fil-A all the time. Fucking Chick-fil-A, fucking fast food restaurants hiring their own private security. So it maybe we'll see it. I think we might already be seeing it. And I remember when I first saw the hospitals having security out front, I was like, I didn't understand what it was about, and I tweeted about it, and like, I got bombed with people saying, "Duh, it's to protect." So yeah, it's to protect their investments.
Yeah.
It's that simple. It's to protect their investments.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's the it's surveillance capitalism. It's the commodification of personal data. It's it's facial recognition. It's tracking absolutely everything that you fucking do and squeezing every bit of profit and revenue out of you that they can.
Yeah.
Yep. And to your point, Heather, about it's already here. It is for a lot of people, right? Like a lot of people have been feeling it for decades, right?
Yeah.
It's just now creeping into, more white spheres.
Yeah.
So people are like, oh man, this sucks. It sucked for a lot of people already.
Yeah.
Right. It's, but yeah, it's.
Yeah, like in 2020 when white people were like, hey man, the cops are kind of assholes. And then black people are like, where the fuck have you been?
Yeah. 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 We've known that since 1492, you fucks.
That's funny.
Yeah. Totally. That's what I mean. Yeah. That's exactly what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fucking crazy. I appreciate the hell out of you guys, though. I really do.
Yeah, I was going to say thank you so much. I had no idea about the Pinkerton Agency, and it's a fucking cool lesson.
I appreciate it. Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now I'm kind of motivated to do like a full on like deep dive into like the origins of the FBI.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
So anyways, Craig, shout out your podcast, your social media. Where can people find you? Anything else relevant?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Craig, host of Voices from the Left podcast, which is also a presentation of the Anti-Capitalist Podcast Network. You can find me on Instagram at dystopian_grift. My backup account is at Subrides for Capitalists on Instagram. And I'm on Threads a little bit and on Bluesky a little bit, but mostly it's on Instagram. But yeah, you can find out about me on Instagram, find links to the show, Linktree, stuff like that, to the podcast network itself. Yeah, this has been great.
Fuck yeah, definitely check out the show, listeners. You'll learn a lot. I appreciate everything that you do, Craig. As always, the 805 Uncensored is on all the major social media and podcasting platforms. If you have any comments, questions, shoot us an email, 805uncensored@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you guys. Thank you. Have a good night, morning, evening, wherever you're listening in the world. Stay safe out there, guys. And free Palestine. And the revolution is you. Good night.
Night.
That does it for the show. Thanks for listening. Voices from the Left is a presentation of the Anti-Capitalist Podcast Network. Special thanks to Nick Josephs for the use of the theme song. You can find Nick on Spotify or on the web at nickjosephs.com. Don't forget to rate and review on whichever platform you listen. If you'd like to support the show, you can subscribe at patreon.com/voicesfromtheleft or donate at buymeacoffee.com/voicesfromtheleft. All the links will be in the show notes. Thanks for listening, and solidarity.